I've had several people request that I do this band, and I want to thank everyone who suggested this topic. Morphine was a guitarless band whose career lasted a decade before a sudden tragic and unexpected event cut their career short. Today, let's explore the history of the band. I've talked a lot about bands on my channel from the 90s, and they all had one thing in common, and that was that they had guitar players. That's where Morphine set themselves apart. I feel like the Washington Post perfectly summarized the band in 1995, saying, and I quote, "In a rock and roll world divided between guitar bands and synth bands, Morphine exists in a no man's zone. The Boston trio had neither guitars nor keyboards and gets by with just drums, sax, and bass. In a pop universe where every singer, guitarist, and keyboardist instinctively goes to a higher note to attract attention, Morphine stays hunkered down low," they would write. Mark Sandman was the driver of the band and principal songwriter. Growing up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston, his mother was a social worker while his dad had an electronics store. His early influences included AC/DC and Jimi Hendrix, but he would later discover jazz and the blues and became enamored with Prince. He would end up learning guitar in his teen years and drop out of high school. This would be followed by him taking a job as a cabbie in Boston, which would see him get stabbed while working. He would eventually take a road trip from Brazil to Alaska, where he would end up working on a fishing boat, and eventually he settled on becoming a musician and returned home. One of his first bands he played in was called Treat Her Right, a group which threw in occasional pop tunes amongst her blues-based set lists. Following the group's demise, he soon started becoming more experimental with music. Morphine would be born in 1989 when Sandman started playing with other local musicians, including saxophonist Dana Colley and drummer Jerome Dupree. Sandman originally planned on playing only one gig with these musicians, so they never came up with a name until later on when they realized this gig was going to last years. Originally, Sandman played a one-string bass guitar before finally adding one more string, telling the LA Times, "I was inspired by an old 45 called Cherokee Dance that had this guy playing something called a unitar. It was a bass string being played with a slide. It was so new and great, and it never crossed my mind before to do that," he'd say. Morphine would end up signing with a local label named Accurate Distortion in 1991, who put out the group's first album titled Good. The following year, they signed with a higher-profile indie label named Rykodisc, who re-released their debut record. Sandman would tell the Chicago Tribune the key to the band's early success, revealing, "We played as much as we could, anywhere we could. When we put out our first album, we gave a lot of copies to press and college radio just to get the word out, and lost money doing it," he'd say. Sandman would tell the LA Times where the musical inspiration for the group came from, saying, "My songs are not necessarily about something that's happened to me. It could be a friend. The more you try to disguise your real feelings, the more they come out. Sometimes I don't realize it till 6 months after the record is out. It's like, wow, that is really how I felt," he'd say. The band tended to shy away from being overly commercial, and Morphine would turn down high-profile touring offers and commercials who wanted to use their music. But strangely enough, their music would appear in TV shows and movies, and as it turned out, Morphine only had say over whether their music could appear in commercials. Their label, Rykodisc, had the final say for whether their music could end up in Hollywood productions. Their songs would show up in films including Get Shorty, Spanking the Monkey, and Beautiful Girls. Sandman would tell the Chicago Tribune the challenge the group had with working with record labels, saying, "Every label is the same. They say, 'We want you, don't change,' and you know it's bull. But you believe it anyway. We really like where we're at as a band. A hit song can backfire. We've been very successful in not having a big hit single. I can't say it's intentional, but it's certainly not our focus," he would say. It was during his time in Morphine that Sandman also found time to play in several other groups, including the Hypersonics, the Country Pale Brothers, and supergroup with Chris Ballou of Presidents of the United States of America. Side note, guys, I've done a whole video on that band, which I put out last November. You can check it out in the description box below. The group's follow-up record, 1993's Cure for Pain, which was recorded in just 12 days, made many best-of-year lists and sold at least 100,000 copies. They would follow it up with 1995's Yes, which sold over 150,000 copies. With each subsequent release, the band's popularity grew thanks to their hypnotic live shows, support from college radio, and word of mouth. Following the release of Yes, label DreamWorks teamed up with Rykodisc to jointly release the band's subsequent albums in America, while Morphine would be on DreamWorks' roster for international releases. Their follow-up album would be 1997's Like Swimming, which didn't meet the label's expectations, and critics were lukewarm to the album. Dana Colley would tell Huffington Post, "The two-string slide bass, baritone saxophone, drum thing, oh yeah, for some reason people were almost wanting to see the end of it in a way," he'd say. The band's relationship with DreamWorks didn't fare much better than Rykodisc. According to Sandman, DreamWorks viewed Morphine as a vehicle for him who they wanted to market as the next Beck. We'll talk more about the label's relationship with the band later in the video. Morphine's final album, The Night, would be recorded but not mixed or mastered when the group's fortunes changed in 1999. Colley would recall to the Huffington Post, "I remember hanging out with Mark after we finished it, having gone through the enormous amount of pain and anguish to make a whole record. For the first time in a long time, he smiled. I remember Mark saying, 'I don't want to tour, we're over this. I want us to get closer as a band,' because we'd fragmented. I think in many ways, from Mark being pulled out west by DreamWorks, we were kind of pulling the wagons around a little bit. It was pretty intense. He went through the mill for sure," he'd say. Ahead of the album's release, the band would hit the road in the summer of 1999, and during a show as part of a musical festival just outside of Rome, Italy, 3 songs into Morphine's set, Sandman fell backwards on stage, suffering an apparent heart attack in front of thousands of fans. He would be rushed to a nearby hospital, but was pronounced dead. He was only 46, and Sandman wasn't believed to have any pre-existing medical conditions at the time of his death. The band's manager, Deborah Klein, would tell the Associated Press following the show, "We're devastated. We don't even know what to say. We're all in shock." The festival's promoter, meanwhile, will put out a statement to the Associated Press saying that subsequent performances would be dedicated to Morphine's frontman. Given the band's name, some speculated that drugs had some part to play in his death, but those close to Sandman would refute those allegations, pointing to stress and the sweltering temperatures the day of the show. Author Michael Azerrad would reach out to Sandman's former girlfriend and bandmate, who both claimed Sandman didn't use drugs. But he did have some risk factors, including the fact that he was a heavy smoker for many years, and he dealt with an enormous amount of stress being the leader of the band, and feeling the pressure of a major record label. Sandman's former girlfriend would tell Azerrad that there was one warning sign ahead of the band's final tour. She would recall sitting with him on the couch one night, and the frontman complained of chest pains, thinking it was acid reflux or indigestion. He opted not to go to the hospital at the time, but promised to see a doctor when he came back from tour. Following Sandman's death, a number of bands held a tribute concert to honor the frontman. Partaking in the event would be members of Presidents of the United States of America and the Mighty Mighty Bosstones. The surviving members of Morphine would end up teaming up with the Presidents of the United States of America member Chris Ballou and Billy Beard to record a tribute song called Gone Again Gone. The song would be performed at his funeral and released under the moniker Movable Bubble. Sandman would die ahead of the group's last album, The Night, being released by DreamWorks, who would put it out in early 2000. As part of the album's release, the surviving members of Morphine would establish the Mark Sandman Music Education Fund, and Conway would tell Billboard magazine, "What is normally a joyous process of putting out an album for public consumption is now difficult and bittersweet, but we all worked really hard on this record, and Mark would expect us to move on. Mark would want Morphine fans to hear the music." The band's label DreamWorks would even release a documentary on the band that would be given to the press and media outlets, in addition to going live on the band's website to promote their final album. By early 2000, the surviving members of Morphine, drummer Billy Conway and saxophonist Dana Colley, would team up with 7 other musicians, some of whom had played with Morphine in the past, to form Orchestra Morphine as a way to promote the group's final album. The surviving members were hopeful that DreamWorks would support them to ensure the band had a proper send-off, but that failed to happen. The album would prove to be a commercial disappointment, and Colley would blame the label, recalling to Azerrad, "They brought Billy and me and patted us on the back and said, 'We know you guys are hurting, but we're not going to support this record. You guys want to do this, you go right ahead, good luck. But you know, this isn't what we signed on for. This isn't who we wanted. We want Mark. We don't want a bunch of ragamuffins from Boston," he would say. Sandman's death also opened up some legal problems between the surviving members and those who controlled the band's old recordings and Sandman's estate. At the time of his death, Sandman never had any written agreements with the other members of the band, and his parents, who were in their 80s, controlled his estate. Colley and Conway would start indie label High and Dry and converted Sandman's old studio into a workspace where other groups could record. In 2004, they tried to release a tribute box called Sandman, but some of the old Morphine material that was recorded during their Rykodisc years was blocked by the label, who claimed ownership to it, and it would result in a lawsuit. While the pair won the lawsuit, it was a psychologically draining endeavor, and the box set would finally be released in 2004. In 2009, Colley and Dupree began regularly performing Morphine songs and new material as the group Members of Morphine, with singer, bassist, and guitarist Jeremy Lyons. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like button and subscribe, and we'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Stories sticker.